Guys, this is Andy, BC Builds here. I just wanted to address something that I've seen on YouTube that isn't entirely true. It is to a certain extent, but it's made out to be more than what it really is, and that's angle of deflection with your contact screw. Let me flip these machines around for you so you can see better. Hold on. Sorry, I'm trying to do shit with one hand. I'm going to get these on the foam so they don't vibrate. And what I'm talking about is the angle of the contact screw in relation to the machine. There's people out there such, these are both shaders. They both run 7 volts around 103 to 105 cycles per second, and both within the 60 to 65 duty range. Given these two machines have completely different parts all around, but they are tuned in to do roughly the same thing. Not exactly the same, but the same. These are the two closest machines I have. I don't have two of the exact same machines. Well, I do have but pairs. One's liner, one shader. But shader-wise, these are the two closest I have. And you can see here, this is roughly at a 45-degree angle. And what I've been taught is 45 degree to 35 degrees is good. But there's people out there that are swearing that you have to have a certain angle on your contact screw to have it a shader and or a liner, which is completely untrue. First, I'm going to show you this purple machine. This is a shader. This runs just about 105 cycles per second and about 63-64% duty. $7 volts. And this one runs around the same. Given they sound different because they're different parts, different cores, they're different cords connected, but I didn't change the voltage. I'm just switching between channels. So you can hear the difference. But these machines run almost identical. You know, at least stat-wise. You know, there is slight differences because they're different frames. This is a much shorter frame. This is a longer frame. But you see here, this is about the proper angle, which people say to have your contact screw set around 35-45 degrees for a shader. This one, you know, is, I don't know the degrees, but you know, it's not straight up and down, but it's definitely not 45 degrees. Not at all. Honestly, the whole thing about angle of deflection, it's kind of just bullshit for the most part. It does play a very minor role. Really, what makes the difference when you're using angle of deflection is the contact screw. This is just a solid brass screw. You can see the tip on it is not rounded down. These are rounded down. And the difference in that is, when this is at an angle, you're going to be hitting the edge of the screw. You're hitting a flatter of a surface. When it's rounded, it doesn't matter what angle it's at. You know, it's still hitting the same way on the machine. It's hard to explain. Say this is the roundness right here of the end of the contact screw. Whether it's angled like that or angled like that, it's going to hit it the same way because it's the same roundness. I know it's hard to explain that way, and you know, I didn't really think it through all that much, and it was just something I saw that aggravated me. But just because your contact screw is sitting up and down more does not mean you can't make a shader out of it, you know. Honestly, it depends where it's placed on the machine. And another thing that drives me nuts is a certain person on YouTube with this reverse angle liner shit. Like, having the contact screw placed backwards is going to make any difference. As long as you have a rounded contact screw, it doesn't make a difference that the angle of deflection is going to be the same if it was this way, or I pulled the thing out and it was this way, because it's got a rounded contact screw. It's going to hit it and slide the same way. Now, if you didn't have a rounded contact screw, yes, it would make a little bit of a difference, but the fact that this person's using a reverse angle contact screw, this would start here and come back, all that means is the liners he's building are actually on shader frames, because true liners are like this. This is more of a liner frame, maybe more so a shader. It sits a little front, but typically a liner frame, the contact post, the binding post, would sit even with this coil, the center of the coil, or behind. Using a reverse angle liner, on his machines, which are Bulldog machines, pretty much just means he's using generic shader frames where the contact screw or the contact post is sitting too far out front and he's using a really short spring to get a fast liner, which means he's just going to have to turn the screw backwards. Now, if he cut the Bulldog arm off his machine, because it sits out about here, and the spring's about here, because it'd be on an angle. If you cut the Bulldog arm and welded it backwards, so it was this angle, it would run the same way, as long as he has a rounded contact screw, which pretty much all contact screws are rounded, unless you make your own, like some of my machines are just raw brass screws. So, this whole talk about reverse angle liner and color packers have to be an even zigzag Z, which is complete fucking bullshit. I know, I'm just kind of ranting. I'm not going to go into the physics behind it. But look, this is a color packer. This color packer I use all the time. Look at it. The contact screws straight up and down. It doesn't have a super long front spring. You don't need a long front spring. Instead of me using a long front spring, I just used a really soft short one. It's a 14 gauge spring. You know? It's not the length of the spring that makes the difference, it's the stiffness. Because obviously it's going to be easier to bend out here than it is down here. But a short 14 gauge spring is equal, well not exactly, but it's equal to a longer 16 or an 18 gauge. You know? Because this is an 18 gauge spring here, and it bends really easy out here, but not right in the middle. This one is shorter, but bends back here easier because it's a lot thinner. It's really about the thickness of the spring and the tension. It's not really about the length. And this person, actually quite a few people, are making it seem that you have to do that. Where's my other color packer? And this is another color packer. This is a long spring color packer. And you see I used a stiffer spring than the other one. This is a 16 gauge because it's a longer spring. And if it was short, it'd be a little stiffer. But you can see this machine doesn't have that true Z, and I guarantee this machine will pack color better than anybody else's because it's got a monster armature bar, and the spring tension is correct for what you need. So the angle of deflection really isn't all that important. You can even see this isn't a rounded contact screw, and it works just fine. You know, people saying you have to have a serious stretch like that on your color packers is kind of stupid. When you're thinking about it, when you have it stretched out, you know, and it's on an angle like that, when you're moving the contact screw to adjust the gap, it's not only just changing the gap from the spring to the screw, it's actually changing where the screw's hitting on the spring. You know, when it's on such an angle, you screw it inwards, the screw's going to hit farther up. You loosen it out, it's going to hit farther back. It's actually changing the point where it's hitting on the spring, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, it just makes it a little harder to tune. Such as a machine like this shader, when I screw it out and increase the distance between the spring and the contact screw, it's still going to hit in the same spot because it's going, you know, it almost hits perpendicular with the spring, and it's a rounded contact screw, so it really doesn't make a big difference what angle it's on. But if it was had a big rake on it like this, you know, when you're screwing it back and forth, it's changing where it's hitting on the contact spring. You know, if it was raked and I turned it out, pushed it out, turned it clockwise, it'd be hitting farther out. You know, I turn it counterclockwise, it'd be hitting the spring down here, changing the tension. You know, that's a big thing. You know, you don't need to have these big stretches, you know, and it all depends on how tall your frame is. Like this color packer has got a really short Bulldog arm on it, 1 1/4 coils. You know, and look at the difference in this one. This is a much taller Bulldog, you know. So obviously, this one's higher up. I have to have more, I don't have to have as much rake to hit out there. Now, because this one's shorter, if it had a long spring on it, this would have to have some serious rake. You know, it'd have a serious angle. And when adjusting it, the spring, it'd be hitting different points on the contact spring. And to hit the same point that I choose as the best, I'd actually have to adjust the whole post. So angle of deflection, it does make a difference. I'm not saying it doesn't. It's such a minute difference that I wouldn't honestly worry about it. Yes, when you're getting a shader, when you're building a shader, it's typically better to have the contact post in front of the front coil. A liner, it's You don't have to have it behind the thing. You could have a reverse angle liner, but when you're building a frame, if you get to choose the frame, have one where the contact post sits even with the coil or back. Those are just little things that make it a little easier. Just because the contact post sits out in front of the coil a little bit does not mean it can't be a liner. It just takes a little more adjustment. And just because the contact post sits even with the center coil or behind it doesn't mean it can't be a shader. Because this right here, sorry, I unclipped it. This machine right here, the contact post sits almost even with the front coil. Almost even. Not exactly, but pretty close. And that would typically mean it's a liner frame, but it's a shader. It just took a little more adjustment. So, a lot of these and just this bullshit that people are spouting that to have a correct color packer that you have to have an even Z. You know what I'm saying? Acute angles. You don't have to. Given it's one of the easier ways to do it. I wouldn't say easier. It's one of the original methods of doing it. But this is an awesome color packer right here. And look at it. A short spring. You don't need a big long spring. And look at the stroke on it. Look at the gap. It's got a huge gap. And with the color packer, when you let go of it, you want the spring to keep bending. It keeps bending, just like a long spring would. Because I went with a much thinner spring. I know I'm ranting, but just a lot of things aggravate the fuck out of me. And then also something else I saw is someone saying, I forget exactly what he said. He said, unless you have at least 2 years experience, do not use a rotary machine. And I don't understand that. That's complete bullshit. Yes, rotaries are more dangerous, certain rotaries, because they're much more powerful. But the fact that anybody who's buying a rotary should do their homework and should play with it first. Because yes, this machine is far more powerful than any of these, except for maybe this color packer. It has far more power, but it has a give system on it to combat that. So if you want to get this running at 130 cycles per second, you turn it up to around 9-10 volts. And given normally that would be too much trauma for the skin, but you turn this cap counterclockwise and it'll soften the hit up a little bit. So I don't think years and experience wise should determine if you're using a rotary or not. I think it's just, brain power. You could be tattooing for 2 days. As long as you're not a fucking moron, you're able to use one of these. And rotaries don't make somebody tattoo better by any means. It makes your life a little easier just because this has far less vibrations and this weighs a third of any of these machines here. These machines average around 7 to 9 ounces. This weighs just about 3, give or take some. And just because this is more powerful doesn't mean a novice can't use it. Given if he's really novice, probably not. But if you've been tattooing for even a couple months, you've learned enough to know not to damage the skin. And if you had it running too powerful, you do one line on the skin and see it's traumatizing it. It's just, I don't know. 2 years in, if that's just when you're getting good enough to run a rotary or understand how it works and understand, what's traumatizing the skin, if it took you 2 years to get to that point, probably like he did, you shouldn't be tattooing. I used my first rotary probably about a year after I started, and that was just my choice because I didn't want to, and I knew nothing about them. Me tattooing with these coil machines didn't help me with rotaries at all. It was just, you read up on them and you study your machines, and I tinkered with this thing for about 4 or 5 days and played around with it before I ever actually used it. I just wanted to make sure, my clients have the best experiences and I'm not hurting anybody. But even if I started tattooing yesterday, I'd still be able to use this because I took my time to learn my machines, like all of them. Everything in here. Every time I build a machine, I at least have to use it on one tattoo to make sure it works correctly. Now, given I have a box of machines there, I have more. I have the ones up on my wall. I rarely use any of these now. Out of my 140 or so machines, I use maybe 4 now. This being one of them, which I just built. just because it's pretty light, and this is a badass machine. I use this and a couple rotaries for the most part, but if those machines ever shit out, I want to know that I can go into my box and grab any other one and it's going to work, and not just be tuned correctly. It's going to work and do a good tattoo. So after I build a machine, I always use it at least once or twice, and I'll tune and I'll tinker with it during the tattoo to make sure it's working correctly. It's always good to have backup machines. Another thing is this machine here. You can see I showed you guys this in another video, and I did change a few things in it. Originally, this machine was running without an O-ring, and it ran beautifully. I put an O-ring in it now just because I tattooed with it for about 30 minutes, and without an O-ring, they're probably twice as loud. It gives a rattling sound, and still it performs just as well. There's not much of a difference if you tuned it correctly. It's just a whole hell of a lot louder. And within about a 30-minute time span, it gave me a fucking migraine, and I was ready to throw the thing out the window. So luckily, we took a cigarette break not long after that. Well, maybe about another half an hour after that. And while he was smoking a cigarette, I threw an O-ring in and retuned it quickly. And it's still loud. It's a coil machine. But it's about half as loud as it was. Another thing I changed on it was the contact screw, which is sterling silver, I believe, or maybe just chrome-plated. No, it's not sterling silver. It's chrome-plated copper. Actually, I don't know why you would chrome-plate it. Just stupid. And then new, thicker binding posts. Just because they look cooler. Not like they perform any better. Besides that, the machine's no different. Everything else is the same. I use the same springs, the same bend on the springs. You just threw an O-ring and changed the contact posts. And this is now one of my daily runners. I've used this for about 6 or so tattoos so far. I think 6. Really soft. This is my awesome gray wash machine. And I've been using rotaries for a while now. I use a Diablo Swiss. I use a Stigma Hyper V3, not a knockoff, a real one, because the knockoffs are horrible. I do have one of those. Thing was fucking useless. That's why I went and bought a real Stigma, which is amazing. It was $637 worth of fucking awesome. I use this for lining. My Diablo Swiss for color packing, and I use my Hyper V3 for gray wash because it's probably one of the most adjustable coil machine or rotary machines I've ever used. It's very smooth, but it's still a little too powerful. And the way I've been doing a lot of my gray washes is I don't always build them up, but certain times when I'm doing larger areas, I'll build it up, and I do my own little way to make shit easier. And coil machines are just a lot softer and a lot less traumatic to the skin. Well, at least for gray wash shading, I feel this is just a lot softer. This machine, even set all the way out on the Stigma, if I set it out too soft, it kind of fucks up the throw on it, and I don't like it. So to get the softness that I wanted, I had to use a coil machine, and I've been fucking around with coil machines for the last few weeks to build a really, really, really nice gray wash machine. And this is what I came up with. I built about 4 or 5 other machines, or rebuilt them. They were all old machines. And this one, which was, my least favorite out of all of them, it was the one candidate that I didn't think was going to work. Just the geometry, the frame, and the parts, and everything I threw together. And it turned out to be the one that was, my favorite. I only planned on using this once. It was giving me a headache, and I didn't really want to switch out machines, because they all run different. I don't want to shade one part with one and then another. I'm just neurotic like that. So I threw the O-ring in it, changed it a little bit, and this thing just ran beautifully. Like I said, it's got T-top iron cores. It's a 9-wrap coils, which is kind of weird. I don't know, just felt like I was doing something new. 18 gauge springs. Ringmaster is all I use now. Ringmaster, what is this, armature bar, and it's got the double yokes just to raise it up because these are 1-inch coils, well, 1 point something, and new contact screws. And I don't got the tube vise thing in here. Alright guys, I'm out. I'm going to make another video right now. It's just letting some paint dry. I built another machine. But anyways, I'm out. Sorry for ranting. I just wanted to get off my chest. Angle of deflection, as long as we have a evenly rounded contact screw, like most contact screws are, the angle really doesn't matter for the most part. All this shit that people are spouting, that's just the way they learned how to do it, not the only way. And if someone swears that it's the only way to tune a tattoo machine, then they obviously don't know how to tune tattoo machines, because there's 8 million ways to do it. And like I said, a reverse angle liner just means they didn't have a frame that had the contact post behind the coil. It means they're using a shader frame for a liner, and they're cheaping out. And they should have just, you know, if they really handmade the frame, they wouldn't make a reverse angle liner. They just would have welded the bulldog arm back. But the fact is, they didn't make the frame. They bought it, and the contact post sits out in front of the coil. And they, I guess, probably bought a bunch of them and wanted to make matching shader and liners. And because they didn't build them, he had to have a reverse angle liner. And probably shouldn't have done that. Should have just made it straight up and down and made a long stroke liner with a little longer spring, which you could have run just as fast with a better stroke on it, but obviously doesn't know how to do that. Anyways, I'm out. I gotta go. I'm tired of ranting. I got shit to do.